Hello everyone and welcome to Sunup. I'm Lyndall Stout. Pastures around Oklahoma are starting to green up, and that means it's the perfect time to start a new extension demonstration. We caught up with Alex Rackatelli to learn more. Hi Alex, what do you have going on here?
Well, we are getting some green up already. Might be late for some phosphorus and potassium or just right the time. So
You also have a demonstration getting rolling in this pasture too?
yes, exactly that we are starting this year here. This is pretty much a pasture common that happened here in Oklahoma, where the producer just left the pasture neglected by some time, and so as you can see, some weeds start to come in a Bermuda grass pasture, and also natives started to grow up, and also other fodder or plants such as Johnson grass start to invade, and getting a point that what we need is exactly to renovate, to rehab this pasture. So that's what you are trying to do here.
So with that in mind, what's the best way to get started?
Well, that's true. First things first, and the first thing that we need to be aware is that we need some soil sample, because if the pasture was neglected, for sure we might have a need for fertilization. But how much? That's what the soil sample can help us to answer the question. In a nutshell, we already did actually the soil sampling here about 3 weeks ago. In a nutshell, how we can do the soil sampling? Well, first, we need to realize that it's not because you have a pasture and you name that a pasture, that pasture is the same all along. For sure, we have different types of soil, topography, and plants growing in different locations. For instance, in this pasture here we have more upland, with more a sand soil. That's why we have more natives and also more weeds concentrated there. Right there is a bottomland, and I walked there and we saw that we have lots of Johnson grass that grew last year because it's a more wet field. Also we have a better fertilization there. So in this case, when thinking about soil sampling, better that we split this field in different zones. After that, in each zone, it's better that we take about 15 to 20 samples at least per zone and make a composite and send that to analysis.
So this, as you mentioned, was sampled 3 weeks ago and you have the results. What did they show?
Exactly right, and I have the results right here in my pocket actually. And I am talking what I have here because I'm working right now exactly in this spot here. And for what I'm seeing, look at that. First, I'm looking at pH here, 6.6. We right on the money. That's a very good pH for all the fodders that we can have here. So we don't need to bother in this specific location on liming. And according to the soil sample, oh my God, we don't have any N here. Can you see? Zero. So once this soil is a more light soil texture, we might be applying, I would say, after that the green up happens, about 100 to 150 pounds of nitrogen, actual nitrogen, that will translate in 200 to 300 pounds of urea.
You mentioned quite a bit of fertilizer in that formula. Is that much necessary to get what this producer wants in terms of Bermuda grass production?
Yes, that's right. What I'm doing here is exactly what the producer wants. So we are thinking on fertilizing for Bermuda grass. In this case, in native grasses, sometimes even there is no economic justification to fertilize. But this in specific field, as I show here, we are very low. So in this case, even I recommend applying half of the phosphorus that we need for Bermuda grass, that I would say, so in this case 30% if you want to promote some native pasture, some native fodder is coming. And on nitrogen, once we are very low on nitrogen, I would say one application of 50 pounds after green up would be enough.
I've noticed there's an area of the pasture that is mowed, and
Right.
then this is still growing as normal. Explain why the difference.
That's something that I'm very curious about it. I realized that here it's a very common practice. The farmers go, and by this time they go and they mow their pasture about 4 or 5 inches. And I mean, I know what's the idea behind, and it's a very good idea. When we do that, we promote that the Bermuda grass start to green up faster. And there is no better weed control than an active growing forage competing with those weeds. So that's what happened when we mow. And also, for more that the Bermuda grass down below there is going to compete pretty well with those weeds. Some of those weeds will thrive. And when it's time to apply the herbicide, we are going to have a better coverage because you won't have all this residue covering the weeds. So when we spray the herbicide, that will cover all the leaves that's coming. But at the same time, I really want to know how much effective is mowing against no mowing. And that's what we are going to be evaluating in the next weeks.
As part of this demonstration.
Exactly right.
So quite a few things you and the team will be looking at.
Oh yeah, we are going to be very busy during this season here.
Well, we look forward to it, and please keep us posted on how it all turns out.
Of course I will.
Thanks a lot, Alex.
Thank you.
Here we are in April, and this is kind of the busy time for wheat. David, where are we with the Oklahoma wheat crop?
Well, overall, it depends where we are at in the state. We actually have quite a bit of range in growth stages right now, which in a number of years, this is what we're going to kind of see, depending on who's been warming up first. So we're anywhere from in southwestern Oklahoma to having the flag leaf already coming out, to some areas just now greening up and getting going, and actually in a number of other areas, wheat that's just now emerging. So we're kind of all over the board in terms of growth staging with this Oklahoma wheat crop.
We're kind of in that ish time of year. You know, it's kind of springish, then it's winterish, and then it's back to spring, a little bit of summer in there. Is that hard on the wheat plant right now?
Well, a lot of that's going to come back to, I guess, how cold does it end up getting. And one of the things that has actually been playing into our benefit recently has been we have been staying cold overall while we've been very dry. So that's not accelerated the growth, kind of like we saw last year where it got warm and we just took off. And some folks have gotten a little bit of that rain, but it does come down to what growth stage are we at, how cold did it get, and how long did it stay at those cooler temperatures. If we're worried about maybe some freeze injury, it might be to where we'll have to wait maybe 10 to 14 days before we can fully assess that injury.
You were talking about kind of how there's different growth stages across the state. Where are we seeing the fastest growth with the wheat crop?
Well, it's typically going to be where we normally see it. So it's the more actually southwestern Oklahoma, and south central Oklahoma where it's warming up first. But as you kind of move back east towards south central, they've been getting some rain. So if we get some sunny days with some warmer temperatures, those plants are really going to want to get up and going. If we haven't got the nitrogen put on, there is still time for producers yet, especially as we work our way further north where we're not as far along in terms of the development, is continuing to watch for diseases. Overall, we've been pretty quiet. We're starting to see the diseases start to take off just a little bit. So we're starting to get that inoculum start to build up, and that's not to say that can't be blown north here into Oklahoma. This last week, you guys had a new way of having a communication with all the wheat growers across the state. Kind of talk about that event and then what you're hoping to do with it.
Yep.
So right now this is a deal, we haven't come up with a formal name yet. We're just calling it Wheat Update, and we're using it primarily right now to just give a quick update from what the different specialists are seeing around the state. But most of the intent is to answer questions that producers have. So we're wanting to have questions come into us and discuss those questions and just try to get information out to the producers. And we have that, we had our first one this past Monday, and we're going to have it each week now for three more weeks. So up through towards the end of April here, and we have the information as far as the dates and times available on the wheat.okstate.edu website, as well as information on how to download Zoom onto any device that you have, and the link for joining the meeting. This is open to the public. You just got to be able to get on Zoom and be able to join the meeting, and feel free to ask questions during the meeting, and we are taking questions until during the week until our next meeting. So feel free to email them to myself or to our department head, Dr. Jeff Edwards. Send in pictures as well as what the crop looks like around the state, and we'll discuss that at the next meeting.
And these are on Mondays at what time?
These are on Mondays at 8:30.
Okay. For a link to all of that, go to our website, sunup.okstate.edu.
On today's edition of the Cow-Calf Corner, we're going to aim our discussion towards those ranches that have fall calving operations. One of the tough decisions that people with fall calvers have to make each year is when to wean the calves. Traditionally, fall calving herds have been weaned when those calves are, say 9 to 10 months of age out in the middle of the summer, and that leaves only 45 to 60 days between weaning and when the cows start to calve again. Research here at Oklahoma State University looked at an alternative weaning date of much earlier, when the calves were only about 7 months of age, and that meant weaning them here in April. As they made the comparison, and this was done over a 4-year study with over 150 cows involved, what they found was that young cows responded differently than mature cows as to when the calves were weaned. Young cows, and I'm talking about those that were 2 or 3 years of age when they had the calf last fall, if their calf was weaned in April, then there was a much higher rebreeding percentage the following fall than did the cows that were left to nurse those calves until midsummer. And the difference was about 9%, 98% compared to 89%. With mature cows, those cows in that age category there of 4 and above, those had no significant difference, no advantage to leaving or weaning those calves earlier than their counterparts that nursed the calves clear out into the middle of July. I think from the cow standpoint, this tells me that if we're in any kind of a drought situation or concerned about the body condition of young cows as they go into the late spring, summer, we may want to go ahead and wean those calves in the case of those young cows. The older cows, year in and year out, looks like there's no real advantage to that early weaning for the fall calving herd. What about from the calf standpoint? Well, the difference, of course, in weaning weights just due to age of the calf is substantial. In this particular study, those calves that were weaned out here in the middle of July were about 204 pounds heavier than their counterparts weaned clear back in April. But of course, if those calves that were weaned back in April were kept at the ranch and just put out on native pasture, they did a lot of catching up, and they caught up to within about 35 pounds of the calves that stayed on the mother cows until mid-July. That means, of course, then that if we kept those calves around, we'd have to have that extra pasture available for them, which in a drought situation probably isn't practical. But I think that at least gives you some idea of what the advantages to weaning those fall calves in April might be as compared to waiting until a more traditional time in early to mid-July. Keep in mind that with those young cows, that advantage of letting them have all summer without a calf nursing on them means those cows will be in better body condition at calving time next fall, and therefore there will be a higher rebreeding percentage on them the following year. We hope this information will help you make that decision as to when you wean those fall calves this spring, and we look forward to visiting with you again next week on Sunup's Cow-Calf Corner.
A lot of the markets have had volatility here lately, and Daryl, the ag markets really aren't different from that, especially the livestock markets.
Well, they're not, because what's happening right now is we've got all this external, macroeconomic, global economy kinds of things going on, obviously. You know, we've been living for many months under this black cloud of uncertainty about what we might do with trade policy. Now we're starting to see some of that turn into a real storm at this point. And you know, I guess it's kind of like springtime in Oklahoma. It's time to really figure out where the shelter is when we get into storm season. And so, you know, ag markets are no different. Cattle markets are no different at this point in time. You know, we're just seeing a tremendous amount of volatility, and the uncertainty now is not, you know, whether we're going to have problems. Now it's a question of how big of a problem are we going to have, and how widespread and long-lived will they be.
Now, staying with that Oklahoma weather theme there, do we have any watches or warnings when it comes to, cattle markets?
Well, it's really hard to anticipate what's going to happen. I mean, you know, markets, economies are very complex with lots of direct and indirect connections. Obviously, global economies now are very interconnected. So the short answer is we really don't know what to anticipate here. It's not as simple as saying, okay, we've got a tariff on this one market. What will that do? There's those initial direct effects, but there will be lots of subsequent secondary and indirect effects, and over time they will play out differently.
Does this change the overall forecast for 2018?
Well, I think at this point all bets are off. Honestly, our forecasts up till now have been predicated on the idea that we would not make any significant changes in any of the trade policies or anything. And so now, again, I think you just have to play it. It's going to be a very dynamic, a very fluid situation going forward. We just have to really watch this turbulence and see if we, at some point, hopefully it clarifies a little bit and we get some sort of a picture that we can work with.
How does this change the strategy that Oklahoma cattle producers kind of started earlier this year?
Well, I think what this does as much as anything is it puts us on the defensive. So you have to go into a very defensive posture here. The words hunker down come to mind a little bit in this kind of a situation. Some of this volatility will be short run. And so there may be opportunities to dodge some of the impacts by having some flexibility. I would encourage producers to maintain as much flexibility in short run timing, but longer term, and depending again on how severe and how long this plays out, we're just going to have to hunker down and try to weather the storm.
Okay, thank you much, Darrell. Hopefully we can build a plan before the storm clouds make it here. Darrell Peel, Livestock Marketing Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
Hi, I'm Al Sutherland with your Mesonet weather report. Tuesday was a day full of extremes. The winds were blowing hard. 92 Mesonet sites had wind gusts above 40 miles per hour. 18 sites reported wind gusts over 50 miles per hour. Fire danger conditions were extreme on Tuesday. A burning index map from 5 p.m. Tuesday evening shows the areas of extreme fire danger over 110 as dark red-brown blotches. Medicine Park hit 132. Burning index indicates flame height at the head of a potential fire. If a fire had ignited at Medicine Park, the flame height would have been close to 13 feet. Tuesday afternoon, cattle comfort values in the southeast part of Oklahoma went above 85 degrees. Antlers and Broken Bow were above 90. Wednesday wanted to serve up its own extremes. Wednesday morning greeted us with extreme cold. Temperatures dropped into the teens at 6 sites in western Oklahoma. Buffalo hit a low of 16 degrees and was below freezing for 10 hours. Lows in the 20s went as far south as Holdenville in the east and along the Red River in the west. Here's Gary with a check on Oklahoma's drought conditions.
Thanks, Alan. Good morning, everyone. Well, March was just about like February. Some really good news for folks in southeastern Oklahoma and the not so good news for the folks up in northwestern Oklahoma. So let's get straight to the drought monitor map where that is reflected for this week. As you can see, I-44 serves as sort of a rough dividing line between the worst drought up across the northwestern quarter of the state and then also down across the western, probably half to third of the state, and then over into southeastern and eastern Oklahoma that is largely without drought right now. We know what we got in February, but we can see what we got in March as well. Again, I-44, sort of a rough dividing line, where we got from 3 to 4 to 5 inches just to the southeast of I-44 and up to the northwest of I-44. If you got an inch, you were lucky. Now, there's some parts of north central Oklahoma, Woods, Alfalfa, Grant County, that area, that got close to 2 inches. But by and large, if you were across the northwestern half of the state, you're probably still wanting lots of more moisture. That shows up on the percentage of normal map for March. Again, you see that green area to the southeast of I-44. Those are the areas that got the good rains. And then most of the northwestern part of the state, including southwestern Oklahoma, heading over into south central Oklahoma, still missing out on the good moisture. Now, as we go to look at the U.S. monthly drought outlook for April from the Climate Prediction Center, where there is drought now, it's expected to either persist or intensify through the month of April, but at least we don't see any development across the southeastern parts of the state. So that's a little bit of good news for Oklahoma. So we'll watch out for that, and we will see you next time on the Mesonet Weather Report.
China released some additional tariffs on soybeans this week. And Kim, what are some of the expected impacts that could have on the agriculture economy?
Well, we're not going to know the impact of those tariffs for some time. Even the steel and aluminum tariffs. I was reading an op-ed piece this last week in the Wall Street Journal, and they said those tariffs won't be implemented for 60 days, and that what China's doing and what the U.S. administration is doing, they're just positioning themselves for negotiations that's taking place. Even if the tariffs are implemented, the short run, the long run impacts won't be known until we actually get into the business of buying and selling the products and exporting it.
So with that uncertainty with wheat yields, what should the producers be thinking about for the 2018 crop?
Well, I think they just should ignore it right now. We don't know what the outcome's going to be. We know they're not going to be implemented within 60 days. It does add risk to the market, and when there's additional risk in the market, there's more volatility, and your buyers tend, especially on forward contracts and the futures prices, tend to hedge their bet a little bit, which means they're going to take a risk premium and prices are going to be maybe 10 or 15 cents lower. But right now, I think the thing to do is just ignore it until we see what's really going to happen.
Let's shift our focus a little bit to summer crops. What prices should producers be considering when selecting?
I think what they need to look at is what are the elevators offering for forward contracts for harvest delivery. And if you look at corn, right now it's right at $3.50, sorghum $3.60, you got soybeans at $9.30, you got cotton around 75 cents, and sesame at 33 cents a pound. So I think that's what they need to look at. What can I forward contract now? Because people are that's actual dollar bets right there. They're saying I'll buy it for that. So if you want to do something, or if you're doing planning on what you're going to get for harvest, that's the prices I'd use.
All righty, thanks, Kim. Kim Anderson, Grain Marketing Specialist at Oklahoma State University.
So a lot of producers are curious about what impacts their haying operations might have on wildlife. So the peak fawning for Oklahoma is usually late May, early June, and that is a really vulnerable time for deer fawns if you're cutting hay during that period. That's also that May-June period is a really important time of the year for rabbit production and also a lot of ground nesting birds. Most of those ground nesting birds are finished by early to mid-July, and by that time most deer fawns are up and mobile, rabbit production's generally tailing off. And also another vulnerable species, which is the box turtle, which gets hit and killed a lot of times by mowing equipment. By July, when it's getting hot, they tend to be underground more. So if you can delay haying until mid-July, you're going to miss a lot of the wildlife that would be susceptible to mortality. Also, that is a good time to optimize hay quality and quantity on native hay fields. But some producers want to cut that native hayfield multiple times during the summer. So they'll cut in June and then maybe later in the summer. But a problem with that is research has shown that cutting hay on native fields multiple times, that tends to lead to undesirable plant species long term. And that's not an ideal situation for a native hayfield. So we generally recommend that producers only cut native grass once a year for hay production. So waiting a little bit later into the summer, you can get a lot of tonnage that's high quality, but also minimize the negative impacts to wildlife. Now there's also the situation of just mowing a field, a native field, where you're not actually interested in taking the hay off, but you're just wanting to knock the grass cover back, maybe for fire prevention or aesthetics or brush control. So if that's your objective, when is the ideal time to do this? So a lot of people want to do it at the end of the summer, going into the fall. But unfortunately, if you do that, you've removed all the cover for that site. So species like bobwhite, rabbits, and a lot of wintering sparrows really don't have a lot of use of that field throughout the whole winter. So like the field I'm standing in today, it's been barren all winter. We're entering spring now, and it's had very little wildlife use. Whereas if the producer had delayed that mowing until the end of the winter, they could have met their objective of brush control. They could have even timed it to take advantage of, right before our fire season, which is typically late winter, and still provided wildlife cover throughout all the fall and most of the winter. Now there's going to be situations where you probably have to mow in the fall or you have to cut hay earlier in the summer. It's not the optimum time for wildlife. But one thing you might consider, if you've got multiple pastures and large acreages, just attempt to leave some cover during the summer for nesting and some cover during the winter for quail and rabbits and sparrows. Even if you have to mow or hay some, if you've got some cover on your property during those years, you can still have wildlife and hay production.
That'll do it for us this week. Remember, you can find us anytime on our website and also follow us on YouTube and social media. I'm Lyndall Stout. Have a great week, everyone. And remember, Oklahoma agriculture starts at sunup.